Hello, this is Deborah with Preservation Publications and Preservation 2012 on YouTube. The first is that food is what has kept you alive your entire life. You can live without family, you can live without friends, you can live without an automobile, you can even live without shelter for short periods of time, but you cannot live without food. Each one of us are 9 meals away from anarchy and chaos, and that's not an exaggeration. 3 days without food in your stomach and you'll be prepared and ready and willing to kill for food. If you can feed yourself, no one can ever own you. If you can feed your family, no one can ever own them. Okay, I have a lot I'd like to cover today, so I'm going to be referring to my notes again, and I'm asking you to just bear with me as I do. Just some general estimates for you, first of all. It takes 3 1/4 acres of land to produce enough meat, eggs, dairy, and produce for one person. It takes 1/3 of an acre of land to produce enough eggs, dairy, and produce for one person. And it takes 1/6 of an acre of land to produce a diet of produce only for one person. Since most of us don't have 1/6 of an acre to produce food on for each family member, there are things that we can do to increase the yield of our garden space available. Let me just go through some of these with you. First, you can plan 2 to 3 seasonal gardens per year. So that's a spring garden, a fall garden, and a winter garden. Now this all depends on where you live, of course, and your hardiness zones. In the South, it's not difficult to coax 3 seasons out of each year. You can start your seeds indoors and transplant them after the last frost date. Now a lot of plants aren't going to like that. Your root crops don't like to be transplanted, for example. So you got to be careful of which ones you start indoors for transplantation. You can grow only high-calorie and large producers. Utilize vertical growing practices whenever possible. Use appropriate pruning techniques. Use adequate fertilizer. And never, ever waste any space. Most of us are already utilizing some vertical gardening techniques, such as pole beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas. These are all things that grow on poles or trellis. There are other things that you can grow vertically as well, such as acorn squash, butternut squash, and pumpkins. You do this by just propping up the fruit and tying it off to the trellis so that it doesn't weigh the plant down. And that increases the space that you've got to plant horizontally. Now, believe it or not, you can grow potatoes vertically as well. You can get up to 100 pounds of potatoes in a 4x4 square area if you grow upwards instead of planting in rows. And there's a lot of information available online that will teach you how to do that. Now, with the exception of cucumbers, all these foods that I've mentioned can be stored in a root cellar or can be dehydrated and stored that way. Growing vertically is also a wonderful idea for people that have very limited space, that are living in apartment houses, for example, and only have balconies or fire escapes to grow food on. They can actually produce a lot of food in a very small area, and it should be taken advantage of. Now, as far as growing food indoors, which you can, some of the things that can be successfully grown inside if you have adequate sunlight are leaf lettuce, tomatoes, radishes, and fresh herbs. Now, I wouldn't waste space in my garden for lettuce and radishes because they're just not storable. You grow them, you eat them, and that's the end of it. It seems almost a luxury to me. Tomatoes, on the other hand, can be dehydrated, which is how I store my extra harvest, and it's something for you to look into as well. I always, always, always suggest everybody grow an herb garden, a kitchen herb garden and a herb garden outside, but not to spice up foods, although it's good for that too, but so that you can produce medicinal herbs that can be used for medicinal remedies. Here's some evolutionary food for thought for you. If you want liberty, turn off the television. If you want a free market, buy locally. If you can't buy it locally, start a small business so that it can be produced locally. If you want freedom, stop voting. If you want to know who you are, stop listening to Madison Avenue. Until next time, for our families, our neighbors, our friends, and our communities, preservation.